Hey, good day, everybody. Welcome to the Indian Boxer Ring exclusive. Today, our guest is Peggy Otto. Peggy Otto is a breeder or the brains behind Pro Boxers, hailing from South Carolina. And Peggy, over the years, over the last 5 decades, almost 5 decades, has bred some boxes, some notable boxes, which have done some notable winnings at different levels. And Peggy also is a life member of the American Boxer Club and the Potomac Box and the Georgia Boxer Club. She has judged multiple sweepstakes, and she is also a white boxer a person of that group, and she's going to share more details about that. But we got a lot in store, a lot of questions to ask Peggy. And Peggy, how are you doing this morning?
Oh, I'm well and cold.
Okay, all right. Well, it's a day after Christmas, and I think what a wonderful way to start a weekend. We've had all those guests, and now is the time to sit back and unwind. And thanks for making time to share your knowledge and journey with the breed of boxers. It is a pleasure and honor to invite you to the Indian Boxer Ring. And Peggy, as with anything, I know a lot of people know about you, but there are people that don't know about you as well. So, could you share with those viewers that are going to be watching the interview now and later on how you got interested in purebred dogs?
My family, but my mother, basically, we always had dogs in the house. The first one I do remember was a boxer, but following that, we had Cocker Spaniels, poodles of, well, toys and miniatures, never a standard, and then German Shepherds as well. So when it came time to, and my mother, not only did she, we had family dogs, but she did breeding as well. And then at one point when we had poodles, she was did grooming for other people. But when it came time to buy my own dog, the one that came most readily to my mind was the boxer. And I remember the picture that always comes to my mind when I think of, she was a plain fawn bitch that was actually given to my family by one of my father's airmen that worked for him. He was in the Air Force, and this service member was fixing to get orders to go overseas, couldn't take his dog, and so my family ended up with it. But she was a good dog. She was, I was little at the time, and I mean preschool, so under 6 years old. But the picture that I always remembered was my little brothers. She would lay under the edge of the coffee table in the living room, and my little brothers would sit on her back to color at the coffee table. And she was just a pleasant dog to have. And so when I, thought about buying my own dog, that's what I wanted. I wanted a big dog, not a little dog. I wanted an easy groomer dog, and I liked the look. So at one point, I had gone into my insurance agent's office to pay my insurance premium, and he had a show picture sitting on his desk of a boxer, and I commented on what a beautiful dog it was, that I had always liked boxers. And he says, my wife has a litter of puppies now. So I went out and looked at them, and at the time I was in my first semester of college. So essentially, a poor college kid. And my insurance agent's wife agreed to take payments. It took me a year to completely pay for her and end up with her papers. She was very well bred, champion sire, granddaughter of Brumble Carolina Star, which was a big dog way back when. And we're talking in the 70s. So, long time ago when I bought my first boxer, she was never shown. I did take her to a show and was told, and she was probably about a year old. And I watched the show and approached Peter Baines, who was a handler at the time and then turned judge, if me and my dog, who happened to be a bitch at the time, so very green about what I was trying to do, could do this and essentially show. And there I stood with her on a belt collar and a belt lead, and he, took the time to evaluate her. Basically told me that she was he could tell she had good breeding, but was too doggy. I wasn't so green that I did not understand that meant that she wasn't feminine enough. So she never saw the inside of a show ring other than a fun match. But she lived 13 and a half years, and in 13 and a half years, I learned a lot about boxers. So when she passed, I was on a mission at that point to buy the best bitch I could find. And it took me a year to find a breeder who would sell me what I wanted, because I had never shown, like I said, other than a fun match, and was very honest about the fact that I intended to breed. So it took me a year, and I ended up finding Dale and Deborah Spivey of Shamrock Boxers. They're located in North Carolina. And at the time they had two bitches, one fawn and one brindle. And back then I was very colorblind. You couldn't have given me a brindle. I went and looked at both puppies, and when I left, I told them that, and they said they didn't know which one was available because they owed a puppy back to the breeder of their bitch, who was Rick Tomita.
Right.
So they were supposed to be taking the puppies up to see him and get cropped in the next 2 weeks. And once he made his pick, they told me I could have whichever one was left. I left their home telling them that, if the fawn's left, I definitely want her. Well, it took a 4-hour drive home, because back then we didn't have cell phones, but a 4-hour drive home to think about this situation. And the fact that they were willing to sell me a puppy, to call them back as soon as I got home. And I said, I don't care which one is left. I want it. Be it fawn or the brindle. And I did end up with the fawn, and that was my foundation bitch and my first champion, which was Shamrock's Mahogany Roxy.
Right. Now, this was not the bitch that you paid for a year to get the puppy, right? This was the one.
Oh, no. This
was the one before.
Yes, the one before. Her name was Sweet Cinnamon Sugar. Simone for short.
Right. I always ask this question, and again, I'm sure people that are watching this interview might have tried to Google pro boxes, and when they try to Google pro boxes, they don't get boxes the dog, but they get boxes like Muhammad Ali, or they get Mike Tyson, on their search engine. So what does pro boxes stand for? Is it like professional boxes, or what does that stand for?
There are a lot of people, Eashwar, that believe that, I've had a big head right off the bat, and that PRO is a shortened word for the word professional. In fact, it is not. It is 3 initials, much like EWO, which was for Earl W. Overstreet. PRO is for Peggy and Robert Otto. When I first started out, my husband was an active participant in going to the dog shows with me. In fact, he even attempted to title the rear end of my first champion, Roxy, after I completed the championship on her, and got very discouraged, and it was never went to another dog show with me again for a long, long time. But after already having registered at least 2 letters using the prefix, I decided to keep the R in there, because if I dropped it, I would have ended up Poe Boxers. And although that could be true, and probably still is, Poe sounded a whole lot better than Poe.
Right.
Not only that, but AKC only allows you so many characters to register a dog's name. I think we've got more now than what we did back then. But I was going for something short and sweet that wasn't going to take up a lot of the characters that were allowed to register. So
Right.
PRO is for Peggy and Robert Otto.
Wonderful. And let me actually, when I was actually, I think when internet was born, you got into the internet very, very quick. And I think you registered your Pro Boxers website many, many years before a lot of people got to have their own website about boxes. What was the thought process behind starting a website? And again, for those ones that have not gone through Peggy's website, you have a database of breeders that are there all over the world. It's an extensive, exhaustive database. It doesn't have just the breeders in America, but it has breeders from all over the world. What was your thought process in putting behind such a exhaustive database of information on your website?
Actually, my website came to be and it's been, I think I've owned it and had a website for close to 20 years, but I was promoting a dog named Prozace in the Hole at the time. And we had back then the social media was email list, and we didn't have Facebook type social media, but we did have a several boxer email list, and that's where everybody went to brag about their dogs or their show wins or announce their litters. And there was a lady in Europe, and I cannot remember her name at the moment, but she actually started a website for me because she was enamored by my Ace. And once she started it, and back then I think it was probably on GeoCities. I mean, we're going way back because GeoCities has not existed for quite a while. But originally it was on GeoCities, and she started up a website for me. But at that time, I guess the internet was really just opening up, and I was doing lots of research. I mean, my first computer, I was like amazed to see boxers with tails in Europe, and I would find them. I'm like, whoa, look at this one. It was just amazing what you could find. So I started compiling. I had an extensive list of bookmarks, and it was just, when I did it, it started out as my own bookmarks. I would just, it was an easy way for me to, to sort what I was finding. So I was like, if I did all this work into locating these places, why not make it easier for somebody else to find? So this is why I put those lists together. And sadly, they both need to be updated, because with the advent of social media, a lot of places have let personal websites go by the wayside. So there's a lot of dead links on there, but there's a lot of them that still do work as well.
Right.
when I get notified from, somebody that I was, trying to use your links and this was dead, then I'll go in there and I'll research it, a page and put it back up and try to delete stuff. But I don't go through it like I need to
Right.
and get rid of the dead ones, but there's still a lot of very good active ones out there.
Right, right, true. I know this is it's a valuable resource, and I personally have gone through and I have started my research from your website, and I've gone through a lot of websites across the world. So it has been a valuable resource, and I actually also encourage people to actually look at your website. Maybe send Peggy a few responses saying this link does not work, and I'm sure.
Yes, if you find something that doesn't, let me know and I'll get rid of it. Or either find the current link, because links change on websites all the time. So
Right, right. True, true.
if you find it, let me know. I'll fix it.
All right, sounds good. Peggy, I want to actually talk about your kennel and your journey about boxes, and a lot of people that are tuned in want to know exactly that. Now, I know that you recounted your journey on how you got your first boxer and how you got the second one from Shamrock Boxes. Um, Now, but what got you interested in breeding boxes? Was that something an accident that was it accidental that you bred your first litter? You saw that the bug bit you at that point. What got you into breeding boxes? Because people keep dogs because they want the pleasure of companionship, but people actually venture into breeding on a more serious note if only they are interested, right? Or if something they want to do. So, what was your trigger point in getting into breeding boxes?
Well, with the purchase of my first champion, Shamrock's Mahogany Roxy, also came a breeder's contract for a puppy back to the breeders I bought her from. And so the agreement was that, they would pick the dog and would get a litter out of her, or not a litter, a puppy back out of her. And so when she, I think she was probably close to 3 when she finished her championship. She was a very slow maturing bitch. And I was also a full-time job. And we all know that showing dogs is not an inexpensive hobby. So it had to be done on a budget. But she finished her championship, and it was decided that we would take her back to her. She was out of a jockey bitch. And so we would take her back to a jockey dog.
Mhm.
I had met Rick Tamita at the National the previous year. This would have been like maybe 92. And told him that was the plan, to bring her back to one of his dogs because of his time and experience in the breed. He was asked to select the dog, and she was bred to, I'm trying to think, I can't even think of the name of the dog at the moment, but she was bred back to one of Rick's dogs.
Mhm.
And she and Dale and Deborah got a puppy back out of it that they placed with, I'm trying to think, anyway, she was placed back up north.
Mhm.
But I was curious as to, okay, if she produced this out of a jockey dog, what would happen if I bred her in another direction? And so then she was taken to a Maryland dog.
Mhm.
Actually, that was an expensive journey there because she was Ellie Wood was living in California, which is all the way on the other side of the country from where I'm at, and the had to fly Roxy out there, and she missed. So we, pay stud fee, pay the airfare to and from, and she missed. So the next time she came in heat, she went back out there a second time, and this time she produced 2 puppies.
Mm.
Um, and maybe I'm trying to think here. I must have owed Dale and Deborah 2 puppies back because they got a puppy out of that litter also.
Mm.
And then I placed the other one because it just wasn't a good mix. I wasn't happy with what was produced. And then the third and final time she was bred to the surfer dog, Seaside Zewo Surfbreaker.
Mm-hmm.
And it was from that litter that everything I own at this point goes back to.
Right.
But she was bred 3 different directions. I watched how all 3 of those litters developed and decided what direction I was, interested in continuing in.
Right.
Because she was an outcross bitch. So first time she was bred to a line bred Jockey dog, the second time to a line bred Maryland dog, and the third time she was bred to Surfer, who was an outcross. But turned out to be the foundation to everything I've got. So it was, probably the interest. I had bred my first bitch before I ever got into showing because my mother had always bred dogs. I was very familiar with the process. And in particular with the poodles, although my mother didn't show, there were a lot of her poodles that did end up in show homes and in the ring. So I was familiar from a distance, I guess, from the show aspect, but up close with the breeding aspect because like I said, my mother did breed the poodles and maybe even Cocker Spaniels at one time. And I enjoyed when my mother had puppies. I enjoyed the raising of the puppies. I was always right in there with her, taking care of the puppies and feeding them, training them, cleaning up after them. And then when I got into the showing and, finished the championship on Roxy, I had an obligation to her breeders for these puppies back. So, you can't provide puppies back if you're not breeding. So it's kind of like a natural cycle, I guess. And I guess that's how I started breeding. Once I and I'm not a big breeder. I've had, sometimes I'll go 3 or 4 years. Maybe not that many, maybe say 3 years without having a litter, but there's first off, you got to have a bitch of age to breed. And if for instance, right now, my secret has just had her last litter. She is also spayed. I don't have a bitch of breeding age. So it's going to be several years before there's another pro boxer litter on the ground, unless it's from somebody that I co-own a bitch with.
Right. No, and I know, Peggy, again, I'm actually referring back to the website. So one thing that hit me on the, or resonated a lot with me when I visited your website, was that all your boxes or all your breedings that you have listed have something called as an inbreeding coefficient. Of course, I'm going to ask you this question later about inbreeding coefficient. But when you started, you touched on a few things here. You said that the first time you bred your bitch um, was you went to a Jackie dog, which was actually, even though your bitch was an outcross, you went either the sire side or the dam side. You went into using a line bred dog. Your second litter to another one, and the third litter to another dog. So obviously, you touched upon a few principles there. You touched upon the principles of inbreeding, or not on inbreeding, maybe line breeding and outcrossing. Now, for the benefit of those viewers that are tuned in, um, if they are new or they are actually starting out with a breed, how important do you think these principles are? The principles of line breeding, inbreeding, and outcrossing. Should that be done? When would you say, is there a formula of when you should do this? Like, for example, when you're starting with your breeding program, you should actually have one of these principles. And once you've gone a particular distance, you can actually adopt another principle. Is there a formula, something of a formula like that?
I don't know if there's a formula, but when I was, like I said, when I first started, with my first show bitch and my foundation bitch, I was, trying to listen to all of my mentors, and Dale and Deborah Spivey that I bought my bitch from, and then people that I had met at, in showing her, like Mr. Overstreet. Mr. Overstreet's been not only a mentor but a good friend for many, many years. And the good friend, her name was Pearl Sutton, that actually gave me a boxer review where I could find ads for people that were actually breeding quality boxers. I knew what I wanted, and I was having a tough time finding it. So I met this lady through calling local vets, looking for, do you have boxer clients that breed good boxers? And so I met her through one of these phone calls, and she was mentoring me as well. She was showing a dog, and got me going to handling classes with my Roxy that I bought from Dale and Deborah Spivey. And so, when I bought that puppy, the first thing I did when I got home with her was take her over to see my friend Pearl. I was like, look what I finally got, because she knew how long I had been looking for what I wanted. And she says, oh, Peggy, she says, what kind of show contract? I'm like, yeah, there is no show contract. I've got a breeder's contract, but no show contract. She said, that puppy's too pretty not to show. So we go to handling classes. But when it came time, when she finished back to the question, which was breeding her, because she was out of a jockey bitch, the first option was go back to a jockey dog. At the time, I understand that I said, a line bred jockey dog, answering the previous question, but at the time I didn't know what that meant. It was just go back into, a line. And because she was out of the jockey line, we took her back to a jockey dog. I don't know at that time that I knew that, he was a line bred jockey dog, but that's what he was. Somewhere in there is when Shirley Bell from Canada gave me a pedigree program. And I still use this program. It is an old DOS program that does, you put your dogs in the database, and then you can breed them before Mother Nature ever accommodates you. Just keep breeding them along. But when Shirley gave me the copy of this program, there was literature with it that explained what what it was doing to compute the inbreeding coefficient. And what it's doing is taking, in this program, it takes the 5-generation pedigree. So, if when you're entering dogs in the database, you want to at least a 5-generation pedigree. And then it computes the inbreeding coefficient based on the common ancestors.
Mhm.
And so I got very, I guess I'm OCD about some things. Probably my husband would tell you a lot of things. So it fascinated me that you could actually compute the common ancestors. I had another friend that I first started out with, and he would look at a pedigree and he would, look at common ancestors and say, well, this, and this. And he was some kind of little computation he was doing in his head. And I kept, Bill, what are you doing? He started showing with my friend Pearl and I. And I never could follow what he was doing, but he was doing a mental computation of an inbreeding coefficient.
Mhm.
And he's like, when you see this, and this. So he was probably, that was my beginning of learning what to look for on a pedigree, to see how all of the ancestors connected, and how, knowing what those dogs look like leaned themselves to what you were going to get when you were breeding. So when
Right.
Shirley Bell gave me this program, I was excited. I had just been given a computer, my first computer I ever owned, by my sister, had all of 250 megabytes of memory. And I did not use it long at all, when all of a sudden I couldn't put anything else in the database. So I called my sister over and I'm like, come tell me what's wrong with my computer. And, she sat down there and she's like, you're out of memory. I had entered so many dogs in this database
Okay.
that I had burned up memory. So that was the first time I invested in a much better computer. and I did that so I could continue building this database on these dogs. But the inbreeding coefficient, it works for me in okay, first off, 0 is an outcross.
Mhm.
Anywhere between 0 and up to 25% per this program is a line breeding. 25% and higher is considered an inbreeding. So when I start playing with pedigrees and potential breedings, I like to be at least 18%. And in my experience, that 18% produces consistency. So I think that, and like I said, back to that Mitch and those 3 breedings, I didn't know what I was doing then, but I learned. And although, it's also a method to help develop your own line and see it to fruition without a lot of wasted time. Once you decide what you like, the goal is to get there. So to make it your own. And I have used it consistently over the years, not only, an inbreeding coefficient, because you want to also look at dogs for, fault offsets, etc., when you're picking breeding pairs. But it helped me to get to where I'm going. Like I said, that the last time I bred that first bitch was to an outcross dog, but the puppies the bitches in particular that came out of that litter are the foundation behind you. You can, unless they're so far gone that you don't see them in a 5-generation pedigree,
Right.
they're still behind everything that I have bred since.
Right.
And it was breeding those girls because, like I said, Roxy was an outcross bitch. She was bred to Surfer, who was an outcross dog. So it was taking the bitches out of that litter and breeding them back into, say, Mr. Overstreet's line where Surfer was produced, and or his litter brothers, to tighten up the gene pool of what I have and basically get to the point where people could look at a dog in the ring and say, that's a pro boxer.
Right.
You know, and I think that's probably a goal of any breeder, is to be able to look at, for somebody to be able to look at a dog without even looking at a catalog and say, I know who produced that dog. You know, it's their style.
Right. That was actually the question I was going to ask you next, but I guess I led you there, or you led me there. But I want to actually, there's something interesting that you mentioned there about the percentage, right? You said 0% outcross. I'm looking for 18%, 0 to 25% is line breeding. Anything over 25% is inbreeding.
Correct.
Now, in terms of the pedigree, you also mentioned a 3-generation pedigree, common ancestors in the 3-generation pedigree. And you can also go up to 5 or 7-generation pedigrees as well. But how important, Peggy, do you think any common ancestors in the 4th-generation pedigree onwards is important to the program? Because if you looked at maybe a 10-generation pedigree, all the boxes would have bang away.
Yes.
Right? So how important is it, anything over the 3rd generation, in terms of calculating this breeding coefficient that you just said?
If you're not doing an inbreeding coefficient and you're looking at a pedigree, you normally, I would tell you, anything beyond the 3rd generation is too diluted to make a difference. However, if you've got the same dog that shows up multiple times in the 4th generation, then he or she is no longer diluted, because of the number of instances they actually show up there. I can make, when I'm doing this, for instance, let's see, the 4th generation, you would have 2, 4, 8, so 16 animals in the 4th generation.
Right.
If you've got the same dog shows up 6 times in the 4th generation, then he's no longer diluted, because of the number of times he shows up there in the 4th generation. So, and when you line breed, you see this more and more. So it's like, where do they show up in the pedigree? Is it, are they in the same generation, or are they offset generations? If they're in the same generations, your inbreeding coefficient is going to go up. So, for instance, if you're breeding half brother and half sister, with one parent being the common ancestor, with the other parent being different, you don't want to breed, because breeding full brother, full sister is obviously inbreeding. But half brother to half sister, you can do and still be within that line breeding range versus the inbreeding range. So, but also, like I said, if you get those common ancestors multiple times in the same generation, even if it's fourth and fifth generation, they're going to add considerably to the inbreeding coefficient just because of the number of times they show up in that pedigree.
True. Agreed. Peggy, I know you mentioned about establishing type, right? Like, for example, you said there's one type, but there's also a type for a kennel, right? So if, let's say, you don't even have to look at a catalog, you look at a dog, you know who's bred it. That's the type, is that the benchmark that a breeder should aim for? The type of, or is it okay for them to produce dogs of different styles? So that's a question. But I also want to preface this question with give it a little bit more context. People who have looked at, who read dogs in the past, all the famous dogs in the past, maybe a Salgrave kennels, or no, I'm going to stay with Salgrave kennels. So they had this F litter of Salgrave boxes, which was a breeding of it was a brother to a sister, right? I could be wrong. Maybe it's a half brother to a half sister, or a full brother to a full sister. So actually, that established type, the kennel type. But my question is that important? Do you have to, when you set out to breed, when you have a blueprint, do you have to have all your dogs conform to that particular blueprint in your head?
I don't know that it's necessary, but I think that's what happens because, I think every individual breeder breeds to produce something that is getting closer and closer to perfect in their own mind's eye. Now, we would like, everybody should be breeding to standard, or, to what the current accepted standard is. But I also believe that if you gave the standard to 10 people and stood them in front of an easel and said, draw the picture of what you just read described in that standard, you're going to get, say if you had 10 people, 10 different pictures. We all have set priorities on what is most important to us in what we think the ideal animal is. So we all breed to produce what in our own mind's eye is the ideal style or specimen of the boxer. So in the end, because that's what we're all trying to do, we do develop our own style. So, my boxers are going to look, I think any breeder, what they're breeding is going to be indicative of where they set their priorities and what their preferences are. My boxers tend to be a little bit taller than a lot of boxers out there. I think maybe they're maybe just taller. I don't want to sound like I've got a big head, because I really don't. I've been very humbled in the fact that you asked to interview me, because I don't see myself as upper echelon, but I do think that I have produced over the years a style that is pro boxers, and I think any breeder in the long run will develop something that is recognizable as from their kennel as well. It's only inevitable that happens. Mm-hmm. Even if you're outcrossing to bring in new blood, you're breeding it in. Most people are bringing it into a line bred bitch. So you're just trying to open up the gene pool a little bit to improve on maybe a problem that you need, and you say that this dog is going to do it for you.
Mhm.
But you, once you've brought that new blood in, and hopefully brought in that, say, that no needed trait that you wanted,
Mhm.
you're going to go back into your own stuff again. So, you you open up and then you bring it back. You open up and then you bring it back.
Right.
You cannot inbreed or line breed forever without the need to open up your gene pool some. So that's when you go out to bring in something a little bit different or to improve on where you need it. But then you're breeding, you're bringing it in again. So, it's a process. You go out when you have to, and then you come back into what you've got. So it's you're still producing your own look. And I think, I think all breeders do that. We do, if they all look the same, we could quit breeding. Um,
Right.
if there was the perfect one out there, we could quit breeding. Neither one exists. So, or neither one happens. There are too many different, they should all be of the same type, which is, your general description of the boxer, but there are different styles of the boxer as well. And I think that's what each breeder does when they, create their own line, is to create their style. It
Mm.
should still fit the standard. It should still fit the type, but there are subtle differences that make it your own style.
Got it. Perfect. That I think, yep. I think the style that you breed is should align with what the blueprint you have in your head, and
Yes,
that's the
exactly.
direction you should be going. No, I totally agree with that. I want to actually get more specific into the your blueprint, Peggy. The blueprint that you have in mind when you're evaluating dogs or puppies in general. Um, when you're evaluating your puppies or your dogs in general, what are your thoughts on preferences versus faults?
I have to have pretty feet. I
Mhm.
have to have a pretty face, or head.
Mhm.
Eyes have got to have expression. And a lot of mine have a deep red color if they're fawn.
Mhm.
Even if they're brindle, there's usually deep red undertones. But the head, it's a head breed first and foremost. So they've got to have the a pretty head, or a properly
Mhm.
uh, shaped head, um, expressive eyes, and a firm foundation.
Mhm.
Um, you know, the the foundation is what carries them. The head is what makes them a boxer. So, those are, I think, are first and foremost. But then you're looking for, a balanced dog. Um, they're not all created equal. Some are going to be better than others. Sometimes, you have to, you get what you, my Zippo dog, the first time a fellow handler breeder saw this puppy at a show, he's like, he looked at me and he says, I'm not so crazy about his head. And I'm like, I know where he comes from. The head will come.
Mhm.
I said, and he says, so why are you showing this dog? I'm like, because right now, this is what I've got. Sometimes, they're, I guess said before, they're not all created equal. Sometimes you have to accept that this is what I've got at this time,
Mhm.
but it's going to get better. You every time, the philosophy on breeding should be to produce better than what you've got.
Mhm.
Hopefully you get that. Sometimes you don't. So sometimes you have to, take a step backwards to move two steps forward. Um, but that same dog, a year later, the same handler is like, where did you get this dog? And I'm like, it's the same one you didn't like last year. And he says, well, this changed. And I'm like, I knew it would. So, if you know how your own puppies and your own line develop. And I mean, that takes many years of watching your own dogs develop. You know what is, I had another mentor tell me one time that if it was there and went away, it'll come back. But if it was never there, it's never going to be there. And because, puppies change as they mature, it's watching your puppies and their maturation process to know what they're going to end up looking like based on what you see at 8 weeks old.
Right.
Sometimes, you may have the stray one or the rare one that, falls apart. But if you're looking at a well-balanced puppy at 8 weeks old that's got everything else that you want, the pretty head, the expression, the pretty feet, and, he goes through a gawky stage when he's, 9, 10 months old, maybe even before that, you know what the transitions that your dogs or your lines go through, you should be able to see what he's going to look like at 3 years old.
Right.
So, and like I said, you may get the oddball that, totally falls apart. So, it happens. Because they're not all created equal. I've said that many, many times. They're not all created equal. But if you know your lines and you should know, and this takes time to get to that point. It's not going to happen immediately. Your first litter, you're not going to be able to look at that 8-week-old puppy and know what it's going to look like at 3 years old. But that's something you learn over time and watching your puppies grow up to be able to predict what that 8-week-old puppy is going to look like at 3 years. It's a learning process along with everything else. So, you want that 8-week-old puppy to be very well, and usually 8 weeks is a good time. As there have been many times where I have picked my keeper out of a litter wet. And when I say wet, I mean, freshly out of the sack. At that point, you can still see length of back. You can still see, how blocky the head is. And there have been times where I picked puppies wet, and that was the one that I kept in, my next champion. If I don't see them whelped, 8 weeks is usually the good time. They've had enough time to come up on their legs a little bit so that they're, they don't look squatty. And they're confident enough to stand on those legs. So if it's not going to be first thing, out of mama, then it's 8 weeks is a good time. But it's only, if you picking that puppy and knowing what's behind them and how it's going to mature is the hopefully enhances the odds that you're picking the right one.
Right.
I don't know if you didn't know a line or what they came from that you could look at an 8-week-old, a litter of 8-week-old puppies. You could pick the best one there, but are you picking the best one based on what it's going to look like when it's mature? If you don't know the lines, I don't know how. If that would be easy or not.
Right. True. No, I think you bring some.
And it all goes back to studying pedigrees and knowing what the dogs in that pedigree look like.
Right.
It's not just their name on a piece of paper or what their titles are, but what did they look like? What did their parents look like? So studying dogs in a pedigree is very important to me as well.
Agreed. Peggy, I know we so far what we have spoken about is more about phenotype, how the dog in its physical appearance looks. So my question to you is, yes, in terms of the virtues that the dog possesses, in terms of how it looks, you can make an objective assessment of the puppy when it's wet or when the puppy is 8 weeks old. But that's not what is the decider, right? A dog which could actually be a stunner because it did not have the temperament might not do so well. A dog which is half as good but with a better temperament or personality can do much better, right? Because as you know, so in selection of breeding stock, you're looking for the type, balance, and the temperament as well. So when you're evaluating the puppy, um, how can you tell, or is there a way one can tell, or if there's a way one can tell, what is the tell in terms of temperament? This dog has got the beautiful temperament, and this dog has got good virtues. It's got the right balance. How can you tell that?
I think watching them interact with their litter mates. I mean, there are evaluations, that people do where, roll them over on their back. Are they happy in that position, or are they, wanting to right themselves immediately? But how they interact, and and this is as a breeder watching my own puppies. There's always, I'm not going to say always, but there's the one that doesn't like competition, and you can see that at feeding time. If you put down the puppy pan, the upside down hubcap where they're all around it, and somebody just kind of hangs back because they don't like the initial frenzy. um, that puppy is probably got the soft temperament. Not going to make a great show dog. Might make a good breeder, but not going to make a good show dog. If you're looking at one, for the show dog, you want the one that is, just out there. The one that, wants to be the first, because that wants the attention. Dogs that, especially if you're picking one for show purposes, you want a strong-willed dog. They're a little bit more challenging to train, but they're also the ones that are going to go in there and puff up, to give you that look at me attitude. And the who was it you were talking, secretariat you were talking
Yes,
about?
yes,
We were
yes,
talking the other night about that, when cameras started clicking, that he would grow an inch in height. You want that kind of attitude, a one that an animal that likes the attention, that you know thinks it, that has a big ego. It's like, that my Levi, for instance, he was an arrogant dog. He I think he knew he was all that. Um, Not that I didn't, it reinforce it by telling him all the time, because he was my heart dog, but he had that kind of attitude. He liked showing off, he liked the attention, he liked applause, and you should be able to watch puppies interact with each other to see, there's always the bully in the litter. And there's always the one that wants to, that is the little bit more on the shy side. So watch your puppies when you're picking one to show. Even if it's somebody going to another breeder to pick one, watch them interact with each other. Look for the one with the outgoing personality. Maybe look for the one that's the bully. But you need that exuberant personality
mm,
to go into the ring and, not, first off, not shy from judges or people or other dogs, but one that wants to just go out there like I said, just show off. You need
right.
that temperament. If the puppy is soft, And it doesn't mean it's not going to be a good dog, but it's not going to be a good show dog. You
Right.
need the exuberance, the look
Right.
at me attitude.
Right. Right. I was going to talk about Levy, but I know Levy, the way Levy came into this conversation was very organic. You were talking about temperaments and you brought up Levy. And so my next question obviously is going to be Levy. Um, Pro 501 Blues, the dog which is your heart dog, so to say. Um, at what point did you realize that? Could you talk us about the breeding that you had planned for Levy? Did you know that you were going to get a dog like Levy? That's number one. And number two was, at what point did you realize that this was going to be that once? I don't know if that's a once in a lifetime dog for you, Peggy. I don't know. You might have more once in a lifetime dogs, or
I don't
I
know
know.
how much longer I'd have to live to do that. He
Right,
was probably, at this point, I would consider him my once in a lifetime dog.
right.
Uh, there was a lot of thrills and lots of rewarding aspects of his life and career. But when he, and no, I did not know that when I bred his litter that he was going to be all that. But I knew when I whelped that litter that there was some really pretty puppies there. And I mean, like I said, I whelped it, so I saw them wet. Now, I did not. Actually, I was not the breeder on paper to his litter, but he was out of one of my Roxy Surfer puppies. That was her third litter, and we took her back to Dale and Deborah Spivey, or no, excuse me. Yeah, what I was trying to get to here is that I didn't go down on paper as breeder, but she was out of one of my bitches, and I arranged the breeding to the dog that sired the litter. Again, this was to Dale and Deborah Spivey's dog, Shamrock 60 Minute Man. And he, this was for a puppy back. And
I
so,
I put up his pedigree on the screen, Peggy.
okay. Well, this was it. I was going to get they were wanted to do the breeding and were anticipating a puppy back. In that litter, there were 8 puppies, 2 bitches, and 6 dogs. And, to me, when I whelped Levi, who was known as Lucky at the time, he didn't turn into Levi until I brought him home. The lady, Laura Nishak, that actually, her and her husband Bill, that actually raised the litter, called him Lucky because when he was a dry breech birth, he was kind of the exception from the get-go, but he was a dry breech birth, and I worked on him for what seemed like forever before I ever got him to squeal. His umbilical cord was hanging on by a thread where it had already been torn when he was birthed because he was a dry breech birth. So I worked on this puppy for quite a while before he ever squealed. And Laura looked at me and she says, "We're going to have to call that puppy Lucky because he's lucky you were here, because if he hadn't been, he probably wouldn't have made it." So I thought he was a pretty special puppy from the get-go, just because I had to put so much effort into making sure that he was breathing. And so as we watched the litter, because I was very close with Bill and Laura, and watch these puppies probably at least every other day, if not on a daily basis, just because I was at their house that often. And Dale Spivey, kept asking me, which one do you like? And I wasn't going to tell him because I already knew I was taking home a puppy out of the litter as well. And he ended up picking the plain fawn bitch out of that litter and taking it home, leaving Levi and all 6 of his brothers. And so as soon as he made his pick, Levi came home with, or Lucky, like I said, came home with me and got turned into Levi. But I knew from the get-go that he was a pretty puppy and a keeper puppy. So, and then I took him to his first national. He was 13 weeks old the first time he went to a national, and was catching the eye of many well-known breeders at that point and handlers, just because he was an outgoing puppy. He, was at 13 weeks old. You could tell that he was going to be a phenomenal personality, and he proved it. I think a lot of people that watched him show as a young dog before he ever finished his championship thought he finished up very quickly. And once he decided to take majors, he did finish up very quickly. However, between the time he took his first point and the time he actually finished, there was a long stretch of time in there where we might have won our class, but we weren't winning in the winner's rank. I was amazed at one time when I pulled up his show record to see exactly how many times he had how many times he was shown and how many shows he was in before he actually finished. But at the time I was doing a lot of traveling to dog shows, and if I was going, he was going to be entered. He was a very slow maturing dog. So like between, I'd say, the time that he turned, say, 12 months and say a year to 2 years old, he was a very lean, leggy dog, and it took him a while to start bodying out or filling in the musculature that he was competitive in the winner's ring. But he was very competitive even in the classes, even if he wasn't taking winner's dog when he was in there. But it didn't take long after that before he fully matured into the dog he was the rest of his life.
Right.
And I said he gave me some very rewarding moments, not just him personally in the ring, but I remember many times when he was young and being used, very readily as a stud dog. I would go to shows and end up at, say, in the winner's bitch ring. And 6 out of 7 bitches in the winner's bitch ring were sired by Levi. I'm in there showing my own bitch and looking up and down the line. Not that I, didn't want to win myself, but I'm looking up and down the line thinking, it doesn't matter to me who wins, because I'm a winner or Levi's a winner. It doesn't matter who wins. But they were, to have 6 out of 7 bitches in the winner's ring be sired by your dog is pretty humbling and uplifting at the same time. I always thought it doesn't matter. Yes, I'd like to win. I'll take the win. But it doesn't matter to me who wins, because that was another notch on his belt that he was producing well. And there were many times like that.
Peggy, I know that you are, you actually are well connected with boxers. You mentioned that you researched about boxers around the world, boxers with tails, without tails. And I know that you're well connected with India as well, right? In terms of knowing what is out there. In fact, sometimes when I talk to you, you tell me things I don't know, and I'm from India. So, what is your read about the boxes that you see in India right now?
I think, what, I see over the last, I would say 10 years, I've seen a so a big improvement. What I guess, what concerns me is that there's a lot of importation of dogs, but no bitches.
Mm.
Or bitches are rare, or a lot less common than importing of the dogs. But you can't expect the dog to do it all. And, there were comments, of that, this dog or that dog doesn't produce well. But the dog is never going to do it all. So you have to, if you're breeding to a mediocre bitch, you can't expect a dog, regardless of what his pedigree or inbreeding fish coefficient is, to improve everything that comes out of them. And because I am a big proponent and believer in line breeding, you have to, if you're going to import nothing but dogs, then you have to use what those dogs produce and breed back in to continue the developmental process, to continue the producing better than what you've got.
Mm.
So, the going back to a question you had at the very beginning, how do you pick the dogs you pick? You've got to, I was told a long time ago, buy the best bitch you can get.
Mm.
That's your firm foundation. Yeah, you could start with a lesser bitch and breed her up, and then take the best out of her and breed that up. But if you start with the best bitch you can buy, or the best bitch you can get, regardless of how you acquire it, you're going to get from point A to point B much faster than starting with a mediocre bitch.
Right.
So you have to, your quality has to be on both sides. You cannot expect the dog to do it all. But I do see a big improvement in what's being produced there. And I know there has been one litter of Levi puppies there. There was, the Bubs International Traveling Man that was out of one of my bitches, and Earl Overstreet's Reflection of Breaker, that hopefully has, contributed to that. But then you've also got, other, and then this is, as it pertains to my lines, but you've got several grandkids of Levi there as well. There should be, enough of the bloodline there that if, somebody is going to utilize what I produce to use those multiple dogs, and then start breeding the get from those dogs, crossing them back and forth to each other. And, it should help to produce some more quality in what you've got. Now, and I mean, again, everybody has got a different foresight about what, they think is the ideal. But you've got enough of, there's a lot of what, goes back to Levi there, and not only Levi, but my ace dog as well, who was Levi's double grandsire, that, it's there. Been there for quite a while. So
right. True. Sure.
And I'm hoping that it has helped your
Mm,
country situation along.
mm,
But I'm not going to say, it's the end all and be all, because there's a lot of other dogs that have been imported from other locations as well. Um, it's just a matter of, you I guess, working those pedigrees together.
sure.
Um, Seeing, what's working with what, because not, all bloodlines don't work together.
Agree.
Um, Sometimes, you'll find two bloodlines that work great, but you bring in another one and it all goes it all fades away. So that's kind of, sometimes that's a trial and error situation. But if you're using good, line bred dogs, it and or bitches, either way, because both are going to promote consistency.
Right. True. Um, Peggy, one other thing I wanted to actually ask you is on your website, you actually have this prominent sign which says that you are white boxer friendly. Now, could you share your thoughts about what that means? That's number one. And the second part of it is, what are your thoughts about using white boxers in a breeding program or maybe exhibiting white dogs?
And when initially white boxer friendly meant that I was just that. I was not going to put a white puppy down for whatever reason.
Hmm.
Many, we all know many years ago, if you've been in boxers long enough, that there were breeders that put white puppies down.
Hmm.
That they didn't want to know that their bitch produced them. They didn't want to know that their stud dog produced them. Of course, with many moons ago with the American Boxer Club, you weren't allowed as a member or a breeder member to sell those white puppies. They weren't allowed to be registered. Um, if you weren't putting them down, you were supposed to be keeping them yourself. So white boxer friendly meant just that. That the first boxer I ever remember was my great uncle Albert's Sam. And I remember Sam as a big dog, but I was actually little at the same time. So he may not have been as big as what I remember him, but he was a big white dog. That dog lived to be 15 years old. Now, if per the old wives' tale that they were, supposed to be less healthy than a colored boxer, why did he live to be 15 years old? Kind of that theory straight out the window there. Sam wasn't deaf. Sam wasn't blind. Sam wasn't sickly. So, I didn't believe a lot of the old wives' tales to begin with. So white boxer friendly meant that, my white puppies were not going to be put down, that they were going to be given every chance at any other puppy. I've never had a problem finding a good home for a white puppy. In fact, I get a lot of people that request white ones because they know I am that way with white puppies.
Right.
As far as breeding white dogs, my philosophy on that subject is until they are accepted as a recognized color per the standard, that they should not be bred.
Right.
Now, at such as if and when, and I'm sure it's a matter of if and when, not will they ever, but if and when, that they are in fact recognized. And I mean, there are European countries that already have recognized the white, or had it in the standard as an acceptable color. because they have been shown in European countries, and now they're also breeding them in European countries without repercussions of their national breed clubs. But to me, they need to be recognized as white as an acceptable color. Once
Right.
white is accepted as a recognized color, then the COE wouldn't even have to be changed because they could be bred because they are a recognized color. This is where my philosophy goes. When white's recognized as an acceptable color, then it won't matter whether you breed them or not. Um, but at the same time, because we all know that if you breed a white to a genetically plain dog, then you can produce nothing but flashy. Um, there's a lot of questions surrounding that in my mind. Also, is like, are your modifiers going to increase or decrease when that happens? And if you bred, a flashy produced by a white and a plain to a flashy produced by a white and a plain, are you going to enhance your chances of producing mismarks or puppies with more than 1/3 white? In my mismarks, I mean, more white, more than
And
1/3 white, or, more white on the face than what is the, appealing. Um, there's a lot of questions surrounding it, and I know Dan Buchwald is a big promoter for the use of white boxers, but in saying that you're losing, say, 20 to 25% of the gene pool. We've got 20, that if there's 20 to 25% of the gene pool is white boxers, then you've got 75 to 80% that are natural colored boxers that are accepted at this point. I think there's plenty to choose from.
Right.
And I, as far as like I said, breeding white boxers, until such time as the white is an accepted color, I won't be breeding a white boxer.
Fair enough. No, that's fair enough. I think you actually have very clearly articulated your stance there. I think it's good. Since you're talking on the topic of white, I did want to actually get your thoughts on that. So thank you so much for that. Peggy, I have the last few questions for you here, so with which we will wrap it up. Now, in your years of breeding, Peggy, that you've been a breeder, what do you consider to be the most difficult fault to remove through breeding, or the one that takes the longest to correct through breeding?
What takes? I think probably the hardest. Let's see, what would be the hardest fault to correct? I'm thinking probably a good front. It
Mhm.
would be the hardest to correct. And I mean, when I say front, I'm not only talking about shoulder assembly, but also, depth of chest, the whole front. And in turn, how it flows into the top line. But I think once you've got a solid head, and your head pieces are consistent, that's going to stick there. Um, a firm foundation. I mean, I've always had pretty feet in my dogs. Occasionally, there's the weird one, but a lot of times that also goes along with growth stages in puppies, where sometimes they'll go flat for a little while when they're going through a growth spurt. But I think the front is probably, and front and shoulder assembly and depth of chest is something that I see problems with as being the most difficult to fix.
Mhm. Right.
Something that's easy to stick with, huh? Well, like I said, I've always found feet to be the easy thing to keep. If you've got good feet are going to produce good feet. Uh, you see a lot of when I look in the ring, and probably my something that just irritates me is a lumpy top line. One that looks like a roller coaster. Dip behind the shoulders, hump over the back, and then drop off. But that would probably be something that I am really particular about is, trying to maintain
Mhm.
a pretty top line. Not just, the slight slope, but also wide. Um, I remember looking at the surfer dog many years ago, and his back was so wide and muscled that he almost had like a trough down the center of his back over his spine.
Mhm.
But he was well muscled and it was always firm. My Floyd dog, for all of his faults, because Floyd did not have a great temperament, but Floyd's top line never failed. Even if he, dropped an inch in height, his top line, you could have set a glass of water on it and his top line was firm. So I think a firm top line is essential
Mhm.
and something that is hard to come by. I have not had, a lot of dogs that I would say, were firm top lines like the Floyd dog was, or even Surfer. And Levi had a firm top line, but it was not a broad back. But I don't know. I don't know if I'm making myself very clear here or not.
No, true, true. I think you're telling what's important and what's hard, and I think that you answer the question. I think, and you also said, if you have something, stick with it. Don't bring something, don't introduce a fault. Right.
If the parts are working, and this is again goes back to a lot of reason why I line breed. I
Mm.
would rather breed knowing what I have than
Mm.
risk bringing something in that isn't already there that you have to contend with after the fact. Um, and that's what happens when you line breed. It's consistency, and I said not everything is always created equal, but for the most part, it's consistent, and it's bringing, when you outcross, you bring something, you risk bringing something in, or that isn't already there that you then got to turn around and try to figure out how to get rid of again. So
Right, right. Peggy, I want to actually, I have this question as the penultimate question, the one before the last. What has been your most satisfying moment as a boxer breeder in the years that you have been with the breed?
probably the most, and this is not even dog show related. I used the same vet for 40 years.
Mm.
And there was two vets that started this practice, but they had been seeing my dogs for 40 years. And they also had a pretty good show clientele, not just boxers, but other breeds in general. And at one point, Dr. Hutto was going over a litter of my puppies, and he told me, he says, I've been watching your breeding program and your dogs and tending to them for many years. And I'm like, yeah, you have. I think I own one of your exam rooms. Just because, I've been for 40 years, I've been coming to you. And he said, you are one of my clients who it's always a pleasure to see you bring in puppies because they always, he says, I have seen your progress over the years. And he said, I like what you've done with what the dogs you've had. That to me was very rewarding to have your vet recognize that your breeding program has, expanded and improved over the years. Now, like I said, it didn't pertain to dog shows, but other than that, because I always took that as a very great compliment coming from my vet. But show wise, it is looking at pedigrees of dogs that are currently in the ring and seeing where they descend, who their ancestors are.
Mhm.
It makes me very proud when I see, excuse me, I'm getting emotional. It makes me very proud when I see Levi in those pedigrees. And the fact that his descendants, and at this point we're talking, grand get and great grand get are still winning in multiple places around the world. That a dog that I had so much of my heart invested in has has gone worldwide. And he is in Canada, South America, North America. There are even, puppies of his in Europe, Southeast Asia, India, um, Australia. Not that I ever intended that to happen, but it did.
Mhm.
So to me, that it is very satisfying and very
Right,
humbling at the same time.
right, right, right. It is. It indeed is. Peggy, I know that you spent when I approached you for this interview, um, you are very hesitant to do this interview, but uh, you've spent the last 90 minutes sharing your journey with boxers, and it is actually you've shared some very important details in your journey, which I'm sure is going to be of help to people. It is a perspective. At the end of the day, it's a perspective. What you typically do is your doing finally, but again, you can get perspectives from people, and I'm sure you had a lot of perspectives that you shared, and I'm sure it'll be useful for people that listen to it. So um, I want to actually end this interview with this final question. Um, Looking back over the years, could you share the names of boxes that you have been proud or you are proud to have been associated with, either own them or bred them? I know Levy is on the top of that list, but Could you also share some of the all-time favorite boxes that you have? And this could be something which you have not read, but you've seen or you heard about or you researched that have been the strong influences of the breed.
Going back, I watched, oh, excuse me, I watched Earl Overstreet show Heldon Brand's Jetbreaker. And dog finished when he was very young. And this is back when I had my Roxy bitch. And I kicked myself many times over for never having bred to the dog myself when I had the opportunity. But he was a lot of dog very young. And my philosophy back then was, let's see what he looks like when he's mature. Is he going to go overdone before I actually breed to him? Well, by the time my bitch was finished and he was mature and you could see that he didn't go coarse, he was in California. But that's why I selected to breed to his sons. But I think Heldenbrand's Jetbreaker was a phenomenal dog and did a lot of producing himself through bloodlines. My dogs eventually go back to Jetbreaker as well, but also his son Surfer. That dog I watched grow up was a very nice, very, very nice dog. Then we get to his litter brothers. And this would be going like through history. You go Jetbreaker, and then Surfer and a half brother to him named Lucas, who Lucas sired my Ace dog. Ace in turn sired the 60-Minute Man, which in turn sired Levi. So all of these dogs, in this line were very important to my breeding program. Other dogs that stood out of interest on the Tommy dog, and I can't think of his registered name at the moment.
Mystic Warrior, Brookwood's Mystic Warrior.
Yes, that one. I liked him as well. The Tommy dog. I just couldn't think of his, and I could think of okay, but I like the Tommy dog as well. Bitches. How about Stardust? And I actually had a bitch that I bought from Earl Overstreet that was out at the same time as Stardust, and her name was Ewo's Pro Divinity. And she would butt heads with Stardust, but Stardust was always the more prolific winner, I would say. But my Devo did well in her own time. But Stardust was a very pretty bitch as well. I'm trying to think for standouts. I hate to call names because then you forget somebody else. And so, it's like you don't want to burn any bridges here. So, but those are a couple. The Stardust bitch was always a favorite, and definitely the Jetbreaker dog.
Got it. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Peggy. I think again, I'm just repeating myself. You shared a lot of information. Thank you so much for that. Do you have any parting thoughts before we finish the interview?
Follow your dreams. If you have a desire to breed, but plan for what. Don't plan for just the litter is sitting in front of you. But when you plan a breeding, where are you going to go with the product from that litter to continue producing? It's not just about the litter that sits in front of you. What is going to happen? Where are you going to take those? This is why I love this pedigree program. I can breed a 6-week-old bitch a dozen times, and I can breed her and keep going forward. But it's a plan. It's not going to happen in one generation. You need to know what where you would like to go with the puppies that are sitting in front of you. Where do you think you're going to go with the puppies that they might produce? It's a big picture. It's a big plan, and it's not going to happen overnight. So don't get burnt out when you don't see what you want the first generation. It doesn't take 10 years. You can go through 5 generations. So it's not going to happen instantaneously, but if you continually breed to produce better than what you've got, you'll get to where you want to be. And you don't have to have a lot of dogs to do it and do it well. Keep the best of the best.
Wonderful. I think that's very apt. And on that note, Peggy, thank you so much. Again, this interview is going to be a permanent record. It is going to be available on YouTube for those that want to actually watch it again. And of course, we have another interesting interview planned ahead of us, which is an interview tomorrow with Kimberly Pastella. And that's going to be at 10 a.m. Eastern Time or 8:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time. Looking forward to meet you all there. Thank you, Peggy. Have yourself a wonderful day. All right.
Bye-bye.